the story's fiction, the characters are fiction, but the struggles are real, the lessons are real, and they can be impactful to people. So our goal was to write a story that was interesting, that was meaningful, that moved people. But at the same time, when you put it down, you made you think, right? Whether you were an introvert or an extrovert or a parent or a teacher, you reassessed your belief system in a way that changed kind of how you felt about personality type.
Hello, and welcome to episode 202 of the Quiet and Strong podcast, especially for introverts. I'm your host, David Hall, and the creator of quietandstrong.com. This is a weekly podcast dedicated to understanding the strengths and needs of introverts along with strategies for success. Introversion is not something to fix, but to be embraced. Normally, we will air each episode on a Monday. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite platform, leave a review or a rating. That would mean a lot to me and help others find the show. Tell a friend about the podcast and help get the word out there that introversion is a beautiful thing. David and Joshua Boroughs are a father-son writing team from Houston, Texas. David is the author of The Extroverts Guide to Elevating Introverted Leaders in the Workplace and co-author with his son Joshua, Anxiety High, Volume 1, There's Nothing Wrong with You, and Anxiety High, Volume 2, You Are Not Alone. He is a retired professional engineer and corporate leader, now focusing on his family while pursuing his passion as an author and an artist. Joshua is a high school student and a typical teenager who spends his spare time with his friends, playing video games, running, and now writing. Both David and Joshua are introverts with the desire to help others learn how to be authentically happy and successful while simultaneously being champions for cultural change so people of all personality types feel like they belong. All right. Well, welcome back to the Quiet and Strong podcast, David and Josh. It's so great to have you back on again.
Thanks, we appreciate it. It's exciting for us to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us back.
Yeah, so you're a father and son writing team. You've written 2 books together. And David, last time we also talked about the book that you have written, The Extroverts Guide to Elevating Introverted Leaders in the Workplace. We talked about that. And since that book, you started writing with your son Josh. And let's talk about that. And for everybody listening, if you want to go back and listen to our previous episode, it's episode 151. So you can check that out. So, how did you start as a father-son writing team, and how did you have introversion as your theme for writing this series of books that you're doing?
Yeah, I worked in corporate America for 30 years, which is what the first book's really about. It's a nonfiction book about my experiences as an introvert in corporate America. But I retired 3 years ago, and when you retire, people ask you what you're going to do. And one of the things I thought I would do, and I didn't know if I would be successful because I'd never done it before, is write a few books. And I always had in my mind I would write the first book because I wrote a lot within work, and I championed kind of introversion, developing an equal playing field for introverts in a world that really biased towards extroverts. And at the same time, I knew that Josh was introverted, even though probably at that time Josh didn't know it himself. And I knew he would struggle with some of the same things. And he was, I was thinking back when I was in school and I didn't know I was introverted, I knew nothing about it. And also knew when I was trying to get Josh to read books on introversion, like Susan Cain's book for teenagers, which is a cool book. But I really had a hard time getting him to read that book. And I'm like, but he loved graphic novels. So I had in my mind that I should write a graphic novel or create a graphic novel that taught, where the theme is introversion, because I knew teenagers would probably soak that in much more than he would kind of a nonfiction type book. So I kind of always had that in the back of my mind. I would write my book, which I did the first year I was retired. And then I would kind of dive into this other project, which were these teen books. But when I started doing it, it was clear to me that I wasn't going to do a great job if I did it by myself, because all my experiences are dated, right? They're 30, 35, 40 years old.
Yeah.
Just wouldn't relate. It wouldn't hit right. And I really wanted Josh to kind of be involved. So I started talking to him about it. And eventually I, wore him down and he got on board. So I don't know if he wants to mention how he felt about it.
I think about what sums it up. It just at first, I mean, it was a kind of a long time ago when we started the first books. I don't remember perfectly, but it kind of just felt like at first I was being dragged in. But then after after a while, I was enjoying doing it, and I was happy to come back and do the second one with him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was kind of cool because the first one I did a lot of the outlining, and then we divided up the work, and we each wrote about half of it. But the second one, we did this on a whiteboard in my kind of office here at home. And one day I walked by after we'd written the first one. And one day I'd walk by and we'd erased the whiteboard that we'd used. It was just blank and it was full. And I'm like, what happened? What is that? And Josh had went in there and filled out the outline for book two. And that's kind of where it started. And we sat there and let that percolate for a long time before we actually started writing. So
Yeah. Yeah. So you did get dragged into it, Josh. But yeah, I mean, David, that's when you were doing the writing, especially around the corporate world and things like that. That's where I connected with you on LinkedIn and then, then figured out that you were doing this great thing with Josh, and that's amazing. We're going to talk about volumes 1 and 2, and there's a couple more in the series, right?
yeah, I mean, so when we were thinking about how to do this, it was, like I said, at first we started thinking graphic novel, but when we started actually creating them and writing them, it became clear that there was more story here than what typically you have in a graphic novel. And when we started writing it, it kind of became this hybrid between a graphic novel and a novelette. So we kept for the illustrations, we kept the graphic novel feel for the illustrations, but there's a story there, and it's a pretty in-depth story. And we came up with this idea of doing it in a school, and the school's name is Jane Piety Academy, but it's a stressful place for kids, so they refer to it as Anxiety High, hence the name of the series. Anxiety High is what we call the series, and it's really about introverted teens and them learning about introversion and struggling to fit in a world that's biased towards extroverted behaviors, much like the corporate world is. So is the world of education. And we take in each book, we follow a student, a main character, through a week in their school life. And in that week, they struggle, they learn, they grow, they get help. And at the end, they grow. And at the same time, they help their school grow and become more open to the idea that introverts and extroverts are equally important in the world. And as an introvert, you can be a powerful voice even if you're not a loud voice.
Yeah, for sure. So Josh, I know that when your dad was first introducing this to you, you were kind of learning that you were an introvert as well. Did you even learn more about it as you were helping your dad or working together with your dad on these books?
Yeah, definitely. Because at first, I think I had the same kind of like initial idea of what an introvert is. It's like the same as everyone else has, which is kind of incorrect almost. I assumed that like I enjoy like talking to my friends at school, and because of that, I thought I must not be an introvert because of that. But then through writing these books with my dad, I realized that there's actually much more nuance to it, and that's not actually like introverts can be social and have a lot of friends, and then still prefer to just go and be by themselves in the rooms at the end of the day, which is normally what I like prefer to do. So I do think I learned a lot about myself through writing these.
Yeah. And yes, we absolutely, that's a regular myth that we bust on this show. We absolutely have friends. We love friends. One thing I will say though is a lot of times it's not just about being alone after being with friends, it's going deeper with friends. We want to have deeper conversations. And that's another thing that's misunderstood. So we want relationships, just we don't want to stay in the surface level talk for a long period of time. We want to go deep with our friends. And typically we might have a smaller circle, which there's nothing wrong with that. And that's, yeah, it's part of the name of your first book. There's nothing wrong with that. Was there anything else that you learned as you're writing with your dad?
Oh, I discovered my love of writing actually because the only time I had ever really written before this was for school, and I just if it's for school in general, normally I don't like doing it. So I always thought I hated writing. But then while I was writing the first book, I realized this is actually kind of fun. So since then, I've actually started on my own, like unrelated to what me and my dad are doing. I've tried writing a few ideas for books, or like a few short stories on my own, just in my free time.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And you know what? I mean, we have some superpowers as introverts, and you probably have a great imagination, and that really lends to writing. That's awesome. I look forward to hearing more about that.
Well, yeah, I think, Josh, I think one of the issues is it's cool. The reinforcement you get is pretty standard, right? So you get critical feedback and then you get a grade. And then I'm not sure that it really motivates students in a way, but what I think happened is when we wrote the books, you don't get that. You have a lot of latitude in writing books. You can make a lot of mistakes. It doesn't have to be perfect. And then you get a lot of positive feedback from people, right? When people read it, they see the story. The feedback mechanism is much different, though. It's much more positive, I think, for us and for him especially. And I think that's part of the reason why he probably changed his perspective on writing.
Yeah, and you also can write whatever you want, and sometimes in school it's like, well, you have to read this and write about this, or you have to read this, so you have the freedom, which can also contribute to really learning to love it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, well, let's talk about the first one. We did talk about it last time, but let's go a little deeper into it. So let's see. The first one, Anxiety High, Volume 1. There's nothing wrong with you. So tell us a little bit about that and kind of the themes and characters in the book.
Yeah, like many introverts, I think you grow up being taught that you should be extroverted, right? And you develop this feeling that there's something wrong with you. And so that's, hence the title. We're stating it flat out at the beginning, there's nothing wrong with you. But Nyle struggles with that in Niall's River, who's our main character in the first book. He struggles with that fact. The idea that there's something wrong with him is being reinforced subconsciously or unconsciously to a great degree by his teachers and his friends. And whether it's through just the fact that they prefer extroverted behaviors, or the fact that sometimes he's made fun of because he's quiet, or he gets these strange nicknames, or so there's some shame involved, there's some bullying involved. There's a lot of that goes into him being taught or coached into believing that there's something wrong with him. So through the course of the book, he really struggles with that. But with the help of a close friend, Sam, and some teachers and his family, he's able to kind of learn. And it's not easy for him. He struggles as he goes through the book, but he's able to overcome that adversity that he's facing and grow from that. And that's kind of what the book's about at its core. And then through the book, he struggles with public speaking, and then there's a lot of parables or lessons that are embedded. So it's fiction, but I like to think of it as fiction with a purpose, right? There's a purpose to our fiction. The story's fiction, the characters are fiction, but the struggles are real, the lessons are real, and they can be impactful to people. So our goal was to write a story that was interesting, that was meaningful, that moved people. But at the same time, when you put it down, you made you think, right? Whether you were an introvert or an extrovert or a parent or a teacher, you reassessed your belief system in a way that changed kind of how you felt about personality type.
Yeah. And so his friend Sam in the book, she's very confident. And, I don't know if she's always been that way, but that's something I always want to say too, is that although, we have struggled, especially you and I, David, we have struggled and you thought something was wrong with us at some point. But there's some introverts that have all the introverted gifts, have all the introverted needs, but they've always been confident. And that's really nice to know. It's not every introvert doesn't struggle, but for those that do, there's definitely a lot of things that they can learn about introversion. Of course, that's where the book leads.
And that was one of the key things with Sam as a character we wanted to put in the story, was the fact that she was introverted, but she wasn't that. She didn't meet all the stereotypical things you hear that people feel or hear or think when they think introvert, or that we teach as society. She felt the same way inside. She kind of struggled with the same things, but she definitely acted a bit differently externally. And there are reasons for that, but she's definitely, Niles is the main character. Sam's the character that really helps Niles grow, and she's the one that's really there for him. And they're best friends in the book. So it really, we progress this story and this friendship, and we work through it as we go. And Sam does a lot to help Niles understand himself.
Yeah, absolutely. So, learning that he could be a public speaker was one thing. There was definitely another theme in the book I'm thinking of, like, as far as like working with an extroverted teacher. Tell us about that.
You want to describe the example that we used in the book?
Mr. Cobb.
Yeah.
Sure.
The Socratic
So
seminar.
at the start of the book, Mr. Cobb, which is Niall's history teacher, is he's not trying to, but he unintentionally targets Niles because he's an introvert. And in his class, he has these frequent Socratic discussions where he'll just present a topic and then all of the students have to just talk about it and then they're grade on how much they can contribute to the conversation. And Niles has a problem with this because he has he works better, like I feel most introverts do. He works better when he has time to think of ideas, and he could be more. He feels he could contribute more to the conversation if he got the topic maybe the night before. And then also another problem he has is in the discussion he can never get a word in because everyone else keeps talking over him, and he doesn't feel maybe he doesn't feel confident enough to speak over them. So one of the big, I guess, problems Niles has in the book is trying to convince Mr. Cobb that he is unintentionally targeting introverts and making the class a lot harder and less enjoyable for them. And then he's able to convince him through the help of the counselor, and the counselor kind of helps inform Mr. Cobb that you know, it's not like he's not like a bad person or anything because he's not trying to do it, but
Right.
he is still like throughout the book doing a lot of things that are kind of unintentionally targeting Niles.
In the Mr. Cobb character too, he's definitely an antagonist in the first book. But we didn't want to write it in a way that stereotyped extroverts. So we have this growth. So Niles is the only one growing the book. Mr. Cobb definitely grows as well. But he struggles at the same time with ideas like, well, I treat everybody the same, so I can't be biased. And we talk about that in the book that, if you're treating everybody the same and you're treating everybody like extroverts, then maybe you're unintentionally biasing the class, away or towards extroverts and away from the introverted students. And he has to come to grips with that and realize that. And we had a couple of therapists read this book because we always kind of want to make sure we're kind of staying within the boundaries of what's right and intentional. And one of the things I remember about one of the therapists, he's like, I really didn't like Mr. Cobb, and I did, I read the story and I was just rooting against him, but by the end of the book, I was rooting for him. And at that moment, I kind of knew we had written that character correctly because we wanted that person to grow and become an ally at the end of the book, and which is what we've tried to do. And I think we accomplished that.
Yeah, we'll talk about him again in a second, probably. But that's the thing. Like some people think, oh, well, introverts can just change into extroverts. But here's a really good example. And I think I mentioned on the last show that I learned as a student, especially as a college student, that I was going to be my best when I prepared ahead of time. That's how all the trying to change in the world is it like sometimes I don't have to think. You ask me a question and I'll just have an immediate response. But often I'm going to need to think about what you're asking me. And it might take me a second. It might take me a few minutes. I might say, and I'll call you tomorrow. It's normal that we think deeply and think before we speak. And it's not something we can change, but it's also a gift because we are thinking deeply. And I'll tell you that, I may not have the quickest answer, but my answer is going to be well thought through because I'm a thinker. And it's a really good example that you need to let students prepare ahead of time. You need to give them space to think. I've had 3 different episodes with teachers that have come up with some really good strategies, and I can put those in the show notes where they came up with ways to get the best out of everybody, introverts and extroverts in the classroom. And that's what you're doing in this book too, is showing an example that there are differences and we all have strengths, but we have to understand what those needs are too.
I think there are differences that not everybody naturally understands or absorbs, right? So if the world works for you and your personality type, you're probably less inclined to understand that it doesn't work for other people, right? And Mr. Cobb is an example of that. The world works for him, and that's just kind of how he treats people, right? He treats everybody the same, but he doesn't realize the world doesn't work for half his class. The world he's creating, the classroom he's creating, isn't working for half his class.
Yeah. Well said, David. And just remind me, so what did Niles work it out with him? What did Niles do?
Well, they were within the story. Niles he's struggling with the class, right? And the principal, Mrs. Sweeney, in the book, she finally figures out what's going on, and she confronts Mr. Cobb and gives him an ultimatum to a great degree. He's like, "No, you're going to have to change. I want you to talk to the counselor." And he does that, but his first reaction isn't, oh, he doesn't automatically understand it and get it. His first reaction is the sort of denial. And he goes into class and he's like, "Hey, we can't talk about history today. We have to talk about this other thing. And I want you guys to tell me how to run this class differently or better." And he puts Niles on the spot, doesn't give Niles a chance to prepare or think. And Niles is struggling, and he's pushing Niles. And at the end of the class, Niles still hasn't given the answer. So he's like, "Okay, Niles is going to give the whole class homework." He kind of throws it and pushes the onus on Niles and says, "You all have to write this letter or this note to be emailed to me by the end of the day with 3 suggestions on how we can change the class to make it more fair, more equal for all personality types," which everybody's kind of aggravated Niles because they all have to do homework, but it kind of helps Niles because he gets to leave and think about what he really needs to say. And he puts his thoughts into words, and those words are really impactful and end up touching Mr. Cobb, and it really are the catalyst to him changing, I think.
Yeah. So brilliant. So what's the name of volume number 2?
It's You Are Not Anxiety High, You Are Not Alone.
Yeah, it was interesting because both therapists that we showed the book to, volume 1, 2, the other piece of feedback they gave us is that Niles' support system at home is too good. He gets too much help. And the grandpa character in volume 1 is really important. There's a lot of personal Easter eggs in there that we didn't want to change it and make it different than it is. It was important for us, for Niles, to have this strong support system. And that's kind of was the idea to write the second book about a character that doesn't have that support system at home. And we had enough time to introduce that concept within book 1, and we do that at the end. So Ruby Knoll is the character. We walk her through it's a few weeks later in this progression at Jane Piety Academy, or Anxiety High. And forever, she felt like she was the only person like her. She was in her own world. She was an introvert, and she struggled at home because her mom and her sister are really extroverted people, and they don't get her at all. And they're just pushing her all the time to basically act more extroverted. So the book is about Ruby, and it takes it through her week and her struggles with her mom and her sister. And her mom and sister grow through the book, and Ruby grows as well. And a lot of the same characters are there. Niles is there, Sam is there, Mrs. Sweeney, Counselor Austin, all those kind of key characters are still playing key roles in the story. So there's a lot of continuity from book 1 to book 2. In fact, the stories really connect well together. The lessons from book 1 apply to book 2, and there are a lot of references back and forth. But it's really about her learning that I'm not the only person that feels the way I feel. In fact, about half the population probably has the same preferences as I do towards introversion, or leaning towards the introverted end of the personality spectrum. And she learns that at school, gets a lot of support, and makes a lot of progress at school, but still struggles at home, and really has to figure out some way to kind of communicate with her mother. And her mother has to figure out a way to communicate with her. And we really dive into that parent, that extroverted parent to introverted child relationship in book 2. And over the time, Ruby progresses from this feeling of, I'm the only person like me, there's nobody to help me, and I'm alone in this world. Even the people who love me don't get me, to maybe I do have a support system that's there, and maybe I'm not as alone as I thought, and there are people I can lean on, and I can develop these deeper relationships you were talking about earlier. I don't need 1,000 friends. I just need a few, and I just need a few close ones that I can love. And I need my mom to understand.
Yeah, I picked up on that right away. So it's that old, like, why can't you be more like your brother, or why can't you be more like your sister? And that can be so painful when the understanding isn't there. And I think that's what you've done with this book, and the book you have written on your own, David. It's like we all need to understand each other, introverts and extroverts. It's not just one or the other. It's everybody needs to understand. And it can be so tough. Like the mother is like, what's wrong with you? You know?
Yeah, why, it's things like who doesn't like to be with people? Who doesn't like to talk in front of group? The people that kind of like that and get energy from that, it's helping them understand that there's a group of people who are kind of polar opposites, and there's nothing wrong with either group. We go way out of our way to say that personality, there's no wrong personality type, whether you're extroverted or introverted or somewhere in between. You're normal. Your personality type is normal, and you're both needed in a highly developed functioning world. And we believe that, right? And all we're trying to do through these books is really raise awareness that there is a bias, and it's biased towards extroversion. And we need to kind of understand that and work to kind of level the playing field and help create a world where introverts don't have to act extroverted to succeed. They can leverage their introverted strengths, be introverted, and still be very successful in a world that values them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I probably said this last time too, but I love that you are writing these geared in the high school environment, because I wish that more was known when I was going to school many, many years ago, right? Like right now, I totally understand my strengths, what I need. I'm very confident. I'm not shy. I was shy. I did lack confidence. But for me, it was just understanding introversion. And when I was a kid, it wasn't talked about. So, Josh, what's your perspective? Are people aware of introversion, extroversion at the high school level? I'm sure there's still a lot of work to do.
I that is a hard question to answer because I think it just for me, just in the way my life has progressed, it hasn't like come up like as much as it seems like it has for you guys. Because I think I go to a pretty good school about that. So I think at my school at least they're good about it. They're good about adapting to what you need and what your strengths are. But in the
Yeah.
past, I just have to like with Niles. I in the past I actually based one of Niles' scenes in the first book off of something I had to go tell my teacher because we were having Socratic seminars and I couldn't get a word in, just like Niles. So
Okay.
I suggested to her maybe we should have a system where someone can like raise their hand and then they'll get to speak within like one or two more people. And then she implemented that, and then I was able to talk a lot more and contribute a lot more to our discussions.
Yeah. And again, when I was younger, it wasn't really understood. And differences do exist in families. So I'll tell you, and I might have said this last time, my wife is introverted, but we have two extroverted kids and one introverted kid. And, hopefully I've given them a better understanding and more acceptance, and you have a dad that understands introversion and extroversion. But that wasn't the case in this second volume with Ruby. Her mom and her sister's like, hey, you should be more like us. Something is wrong with you.
It's one of those kind of strange things too, because as an introverted parent who struggled in a world that favors extroverted behaviors, you kind of don't want your child to have to go through that. So I have to be careful sometimes because I'll find myself acting like that extroverted parent. I'll find myself trying to push Zach or Josh to do stuff they don't want to do because I know it's going to be helpful for them in the long run if they just do it. It's not the right thing to do, right? But as a parent, I'm just trying to make sure they don't have to struggle and go through that pain. And what I have to do is take a step back and say, look, that's really not what I need to be doing here. It's really hard, and I think as an introvert, I'm surprised that I do this, but I think it's just this reaction to all the things you struggle with of your life, and you really have to let them learn a lesson. You have to really provide this support system where they feel loved and they're safe, and you can talk about things, and you can let them go to the room if they need to go to the room and be quiet. You can let them, if they don't want to, run for student council and have a ton of leadership, out or open or kind of out there leadership positions for their college resume. That's fine, and you have to accept that, right? Because that's not who they are. And if you force them to do that, they're really not leveraging their strengths. And what you're really doing is you're kind of falling into the trap of creating of perpetuating this bias that you're working so hard to end. So as an introvert, I think there's a trap there that we all have to look out for as introverted parents as well. So it's not just extroverted parents, I think.
Yeah, and introverts parent introverts, introverts parent extroverts, and vice versa. And there needs to just be a lot more discussion and understanding of personalities all around.
I would agree, absolutely agree with that. So, and hopefully through these books, I mean, and I think these books, if you're a teacher or a parent reading it, it'll make you think. So if you're an extroverted parent, extroverted teacher, there's a lot of cool lessons. If you're an introverted parent, introverted teacher, I think you can learn a lot. And then as a student or a person, as you said earlier, there's not, this is not something they're teaching in schools. They're not really talking about personality type. So learning these lessons well before you get into corporate America or the real world, I think will serve everyone a lot of positive, or give them a lot of, it will help them a lot, because if for me, it took me 30 years to figure this all out. And that's not efficient, and nobody really wants that. And I don't want that for Josh. I want Josh to kind of understand what he's up against and be able and have the skills and be able to feel comfortable being an introvert and be able to leverage his strengths as an introvert and be happy in his life. And there'll be struggles along the way, but it's definitely better if you know about them and you're prepared for them, I think.
Yeah, and even as I'm thinking about the characters, if they're real life characters, they probably still have a lot of learning to do. But at least they're starting at the right spot, you know, because it took me a long time to figure this all out too. But I'm still learning and growing. But now I know what my core is. Like, here's where I'm really good at this thing. I'm really good at these things. I do need time to think. I do need some time alone, and just understanding all that makes all the difference. And I definitely related to the characters Nile and Ruby. And there was a part, and I don't know if bullying was quite, it wasn't maybe that strong, but there were some girls that were giving Ruby a hard time. And they're kind of saying to her, there's something wrong with you. When somebody's telling you that, and we're deep thinkers, sometimes you can get really tongue-tied. If someone's saying there's something wrong with you and you're not thinking on your feet, because that's often not our gift, you can really get tongue-tied. And I just really related to that. And I felt that pain, like, oh yeah, that's terrible. I've been in that situation.
I know, and hopefully, what we wrote represents, real world scenarios, even though it's fiction. And we tried to create these situations that were real, but at the same time, push the characters to grow. And in doing that, you have to kind of portray, people are not nice to each other all the time. And we try to do it in a way that was respectful. At the same time, we try to, be honest about it.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I think we've all, at least I know I've been in those situations before as well. And it's something you just have to work through. But I think it's good being able to visualize it. So like reading a book like this as a student, you visualize kind of these scenarios, even if they're not happening to you. So if it does happen to you, you'll be a little bit more prepared on how to handle it. But yeah, those are always a little bit difficult for me to write, because you're kind of you're having to create this character that's not always positive, but I think they're critical and necessary for the storyline for sure.
Yeah, and so Ruby's big part of the story. She's trying to create an introvert club, and it ends up being an introvert and extrovert club. Really, just talking about what we're talking about. Like, let's learn about all of our personalities. Do you either of you have any kind? Is that a real thing? Have you actually seen a personality type club?
What about a club? But when I worked in corporate America, so for the longest time, I struggled as an introvert, but over time I thought I had it figured out and I thought I was doing fine. And then all of a sudden something would come up and I would be, that whole visibility card would be played against me again. And I'm like, what else do I have to do to be more visible? I'm doing all these things. I've been working for 25 years. I mean, what's going on? So that was about the time that Workplace, which is Facebook's Facebook's tool for the work environment, came out. And we had this online virtual ability to communicate with each other. So at the time, I created a group called Quiet Leadership within the company I work for. And we started this conversation, and I was surprised that we quickly, people started joining, and we quickly had several thousand people. So we started writing articles, and it was all with their internal to the company and narrating these discussions and having these conversations about it. And that's kind of was the genesis of this idea, at least in my mind, of this club. And the idea, and we worked really hard for it not to be an introverted type community. It had to be a community that had extroverts as well, because in corporate America, in a lot of cases, a lot of the extroverts have the power. And we needed the people with the power as part of the conversation. So we felt strongly that it had to be a conversation that really brought people together and let extroverts be extroverts and let introverts be introverts, but at the same time, open their eyes to what each group needed, right? So if you're going to have a meeting, for example, at a workplace, you need to let the introverts know what the topics are ahead of time, let them think about it, and then let them contribute ahead as well. And at the same time, if you have a pre-read and you bring a bunch of experts into a meeting, you just can't say, oh, we had a pre-read, you've done your pre-read, we're not going to talk about it. You do a disservice to them. So you really have to think about your audience being diverse. So you have to have the pre-read. At the same time, though, when you get to the meeting, you got to talk about the pre-read, because that's where the experts kind of get into lean into it and get into there. And then at the end of the meeting, you need to let time for introverts to soak on it and think about it a while. So if you make all your decisions at the meeting, it serves the extroverts well, but it doesn't necessarily serve the introverts. So it's rough thinking about having this diverse group of people that's made up of both basically half introverts and half extroverts, and creating an environment that really works for both of them. And a lot of those things we did within my workspace, and we kind of built some of those ideas into this club, and wanted it to be more than just introverts coming together and talking to introverts. We wanted it to be a really a personality type club where, regardless of what personality you had, you were part of it. And I think that storyline plays well too, because the core group of friends that Ruby and Sam have some extroverts in them, and they're close friends. And my experience as well tells me that some of my closest friends at work were extroverts, and the fact that their strengths were different than mine made our relationship and our ability to create value much greater when we worked together than it was when we just did our own thing. So what they did well, I didn't do as well, but what I did well, they didn't do as well. But when we came together and we truly had this intent to work together and to be partners, it was always much better. So we tried to build that into the books.
Yeah, and along those lines, as I was reading it, so I'm thinking, okay, Ruby understands herself and she kind of knows what she needs, what her strengths are. But in this story, it's not enough, because her mother and her sister, other people at school, don't understand her. And so it's not enough just for the introvert to know their strengths and needs. It's so important and of course, that's the work that you do and you've done. It's important for everybody to know, because she still had struggles, even though she had accepted who she was. And accepted isn't exactly the word, stronger than that for me. She really embraced who she was, but still she struggled because other people didn't understand introversion.
And it was those people closest to her, right? The people that she loved the most, that loved her the most, and they weren't connecting at that core level and understanding each other. And in fact, some of the things they were doing were probably pushing each other apart unintentionally. They thought they were helping, but some of the things they were doing weren't really positive. And it hurt both of them, right? At the end of the day, they were both hurting from it. It wasn't like, the mother and Ruby, it wasn't like one was totally oblivious. They both saw each other's pain. They just didn't know how to communicate and work through it. And that's part of what they learn as they progress through the book.
And we've been hearing people say that they like our second book over our first one. And I think that's a big reason why, because in the first book, I'm not saying Niles doesn't have problems, but outside of Mr. Cobb, most people accept him for who he is. But Ruby probably has a more realistic life of the difficulty it is to get people to accept and love you as an introvert.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that. So what do you want people to take away, people in high school, parents, teachers, from both books, either book? What are the major themes that you each would like to see people walk away with?
I think it's this realization that, personality type is a real dimension of diversity, right? It's part of what makes us unique and interesting, and it affects all of us. So, right, So regardless of your gender, your race, or whatever, still half of each of those groups are half introverted, roughly, or lean to the introverted end of the spectrum, and half leans to the extroverted end of the spectrum. So it's kind of globally applicable to all groups. And if we create an environment that really only leverages the strengths of extroverts and even teaches our introverts to act extroverted, we're doing the world a disservice, because there's a whole skill set, a whole strength set that comes with the introverts, that if you just let them leverage those skills to do more than just act extroverted to fit in, they're going to add a lot more value than we realize they do. But they're going to do it in a different way. They're not going to do it like extroverts. You're not going to be the loudest voice in the room. They're not going to be the person who stands up and delivers the TED talk. They're going to do it differently, but they're going to add a ton of value while they're doing it. And what they're doing is just as valuable as the TED talk.
Yeah. And David, you've done a lot of work with belonging, and there's so many factors in that. But if you ignore this one, people can definitely feel like they don't belong if you don't understand personality types.
And we address that in the book too. It's this idea of, and in all three of the books, they kind of have this belonging theme, right? It's, you have diversity. You can have a diverse group. You can have an inclusive group where inclusion is expected, where people are expected to participate. But you can have both those things and still have people that don't feel like they belong in the group because of how you try to manage diversity and how you try to manage inclusion. And it really boils down to you haven't created an environment where people can be authentic, where they can be themselves, and you have to do that for them to thrive. And when you can do that, whether it's in the school or in the workplace, more people will feel like they belong, and they'll be happier, and they'll be more productive, and you'll see more success. I absolutely believe that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so Josh, what do you want people to take away from your books?
Well, it's for everyone, but we mainly targeted it towards high schoolers. So I think it's just like, if there are any high schoolers whose situations are similar to Niall's and Ruby, and they haven't had the realizations that they get throughout the book, I just want them to, the best case scenario is they read the books, and then the message, which is the subtitle of each book, "There's nothing wrong with you, or you are not alone," that just really sticks with them and helps them form bonds with other people who also experience this.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so when can we expect volume 3?
Well, we purposely wrote books during the summer, so it hasn't been a fast process, because with Josh in school, I didn't want him burdened with the extra workload of writing books during the school year. But we haven't really talked about it. Right now, we're just trying to get book 2 out in the world, which is a lot of work in itself. We'll have to sit down and come up with the brainstorm the next book and figure out. Josh going to college next year, it presents another kind of dilemma on how we manage this. In my mind, it'd be great if we could do all 4 of them together, but we'll have to see how that all plays out. Maybe we'll do them quicker than we did it the last time, but we'll have to see. So I wouldn't expect volume 3 until next summer, but you never know. You never know.
Okay, but you did put it out there. So you said Anxiety High volume 3, and embrace your strengths. And I love that, because that's what it's really all about. We need to understand what we need, but there's so many gifts that come from introversion. It's not a less than thing. We're not trying to become extroverts. Introverts are deep thinkers. We have great imaginations, and the world needs our great imaginations. And honestly, we also enjoy having great imaginations. So looking forward to volume 3.
And those are the kind of 4 themes in my life. Was first, I had to realize there was nothing wrong with me, and then I had to realize that the world there's about half the people in the world that kind of feel and act and have the preferences I do. And then I really had to, I had to resist this idea that I needed to fit in as an extrovert, and that was tough. That was a lot of pressure to be an extrovert or act extroverted. And I really had to embrace my strengths as an introvert, and that's when I became successful. I really became successful. Really became happy in what I was doing in work. And then the fourth volume that we've talked about is this idea around advocating for yourself and advocating for others, because that's something as an introvert I absolutely struggled with my entire life. But giving people permission to say it's okay to talk about your work. It's okay because your work deserves it, right? It's okay to advocate for yourself and what's going on. And maybe you learn to do that by advocating for your friends and your coworkers and the people in your classroom that are introverted, and helping them get the recognition that they need. So those are the 4 themes, which are really kind of common themes for all introverts in all cultures. But that's the idea of the books.
Yeah, very good. Very good. And again, I mean, can be beneficial to those that are still in high school or college or teachers and parents, and you bring all those different groups into both of these books.
We could probably write this. We probably could use similar characters and move the setting from a school to a corporate environment, to a work environment, and write very similar stories, and it would work in both. It would work in both places. So
Yeah, or Niles and Ruby go to college, you know.
maybe so. Have to come up with a new name for that.
Yeah, Josh will have more experience with that next year. So, all right, Josh and David, what else? Is there anything else you want to add?
I thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk about the books, and for giving us a platform to kind of share with people what they're about. And, our goal is really to get people to read them and to share them with others, because I think that's kind of how these grassroots books really take off, is when people share them with other people. So please do that. If you read it and you like it, you love it, tell other people about it so they can kind of benefit from it as well. And then as a parent, I always kind of like to end this with this idea that regardless of who reads this book, it's been a worthwhile endeavor for me, because the fact that my teenage son's willing to spend the time with me to write a book and do something that's not easy to do, that takes a lot of interaction and struggle and a lot of time, as a parent, it really is uplifting. And I really, always like to tell Josh that I appreciate it more than he's really ever going to understand. And he might make me not understand it until he's a parent himself. So I'm truly appreciative that he's been willing to join me as a partner, as a true partner on the journey to create these books. So,
all right, final word, Josh.
Yeah, just if what we were talking about today sounds interesting to you, then you can buy Anxiety High on Amazon.
Okay. And is there anywhere else, David, that people can go to find out more about you and your work?
yeah, I think maybe the first, like Josh said, the first place, if you're looking to read it, go to Amazon. You can type in Anxiety High. The books will come up. They're set up as a series, so you can see both of them. And as we add 3 and 4, we'll add them to the series as well. So that's a great place to go. And there's some synopsis, and you get an idea about what's there. You can actually read excerpts within Amazon, so you can kind of get a feel for what's in the book. Also, another great place to go is our website. It's called introvertsandbelonging.com. And that way you can leave links back to Amazon. So you can, if you don't want to remember anything else, just remember introvertsandbelonging.com. And that'll take you to Amazon. It'll also take you to my LinkedIn homepage, where I've written tons of articles about introversion. It'll take you to my nonfiction book as well. And within LinkedIn and from that webpage, you can get to some free excerpts for both volume 1 and volume 2. So you can read a couple chapters and get a feel for who the characters are and kind of what they're dealing with. And you can get to those through LinkedIn. The easiest way might be to go through the links on the website. But those are kind of key places to go to get the information. So David Boroughs on LinkedIn, introvertsandbelonging.com, or search for Anxiety High on Amazon.com.
All right. Thank you both. You're doing great work, great books. Also, just you're helping with that message that there is nothing wrong with you, that introverts and extroverts, we all have great strengths. Just you might go about things differently, and it's all good. So thanks again to both of you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I look forward to further connecting with you. Reach out at david@quietandstrong.com or check out the quietandstrong.com website, which includes blog posts and links to social media channels. Send me topics or guests you would like to see on the show. If you're interested in getting to know yourself better, there's now a free Type Finder personality assessment on the Quiet and Strong website. This free assessment will give you a brief report, including the 4-letter Myers-Briggs code, and you can also have the option of purchasing the full report if you'd like to learn more. I'll add a link to the show notes. So many great things about being an introvert, and we need those to be understood. Get to know your introverted strengths and needs and be strong.